Next on the agenda is a keynote address from Dr. John Polanyi, who, as I'm sure everybody knows, is a Nobel laureate in chemistry and has also been very active in peace issues and war issues before, during, and since. So it's really a great pleasure to now hear the keynote address from Professor John Polanyi.
I'm not sure which of these is operative. Hello, everybody. Thank you for making the big effort to come here. And something is going to change after this meeting. I am going to get far fewer emails from Medford and but I don't look forward to that, because being in touch with her is a joy, and this meeting is a fantastic achievement, not actually only by her, but she has friends and minions who are rushing around us brewing coffee and doing all sorts of illegal things on our behalf. And I do want to thank them too. I have in front of me something from the Star today, which says, "How to Save Our Planet from Nuclear Annihilation." And it's an article on the opposite to the editorial page, and it's timely. And somebody has been trying to find a Xerox machine, and have they found it? No, they disappeared with a copy of this article, and will never be seen again. I am standing on this platform because I work at this institution, have lectured in chemistry in this building, and in fact was recruited in these environs by the Students' Christian movement, who said, got to do something about nuclear weapons. And actually I knew a bit because I'd been to Princeton and met the people who had made the bomb and so on. So, but my reaction at first was the one you just heard, namely, I'm not an expert, though my subject is science. I'm a chemical physicist. I'm a failed physicist who works in the Department of Chemistry at the University of Toronto. Oh, yes. So I've just been given a copy of an article. It has my name on it. And I haven't seen it in this form, but there is our planet. What the article is just yesterday afternoon, I wrote down what I had planned to say to you. I'd been given 30 minutes, and I'll try and take less. And I decided to just give some history. And the first part of the history is not ancient history, it's last week. And it's when Donald Trump wrote an open letter to the head of North Korea, Kim Jong-un. And I think all public affairs should be dealt with in that open fashion. And I want to send our meeting's thanks to Donald Trump. I realize that might be controversial. But what he said in the letter started out by being the right thing to say. And I've got his letter here, not the original, but it'll do. And he says, a friendly bunch of sentiments. We greatly appreciate, POTUS, the President of the United States, we greatly, he would love using we addressed to himself. We greatly appreciate your time, meaning Kim Jong-un's time, your patience, and your efforts with respect to a summit meeting. This obviously is between the United States and North Korea. A summit meeting long sought by both parties. An excellent opening. Then he goes on in the same paragraph to do two things. One is cancel the summit, and the second is to threaten mass destruction of North Korea. I don't know if you want me to document what I'm saying, but it's all perfectly true. He then goes on his letter about the massive, powerful nuclear weapons that the United States has, and he hopes to God they will never have to be used. He believes in the power of prayer. Well, you know, why do I mention this apart from being a bit jocular? But I mention it because it encapsulates what faces us, the alternatives that face us. One alternative is to meet, as you decided to do. The other alternative is to drop nuclear bombs. You have cast your vote already by coming to this meeting. I'm going to just enlarge for a moment on the assumption in the title that Meta, I think it was Meta, chose for this meeting, which implies that we're conscious, all of us here, of the need to save the world. That wasn't always the case among people walking on this globe. Actually, there were just a few cranks who went around with a sign saying, save the world. But now there are millions of us. And the new awareness, and this is where my little bit of history is coming in my mind, dates from a moment which I shared with many people in this room, when the Apollo moon shot was partway to the moon, and Neil Armstrong stuck his camera through a rather thick porthole, and there was our delicate and fragile little Earth, our still infant planet, looking a bit blue with wisps of white blanket keeping it to the right temperature for the present. Well, that was seen actually on television, like people have calculated by, my recollection is 55 million people were tuned in. I was one of them. And it was an important moment in history. We realized where we were and how fragile that place is. Well, I have two more dates in history, and they should fit into the allotted 30 minutes. The next date takes the clock whizzing back to 1949, and I was young, and I wasn't actually aware of what was going on. I mean, in general terms, I was aware, but the event that I want to face you with took place in a small committee room in Washington. It was a meeting of it's called the General Advisory Committee of the Atomic Energy Authority of the United States. 13 guys, no women, 13 guys meeting in a small hot room in Washington. 11 of those guys were scientists, nuclear scientists, quite a few of whom I met subsequently and came to admire and respect. And they were all in that room because they were members of the government's General Advisory Committee in 1949. Not all of you were alive, but quite a few of you. And they all had Q clearance, which is the highest security clearance. And that, in a way, should fill you with dread, because it means that this meeting was taking place not only in a small hot room, but out of sight of everyone and out of sight of the scientific community. And this is a Science for Peace occasion, among other things, the scientific community in which I do have some faith. But they couldn't talk to each other. They could barely talk in their sleep. That was such a high security classification. They were supposed to report, and they did. They took a vote. And the record of the vote is in a book called The Ruin of Robert Oppenheimer. It's in print right now. And the record says that of the 11 scientists present, all big names in my life, 10 said, we do not need a speedy program to build a hydrogen bomb. We're against it. The 11th scientist abstained, torn. That left 2 people, non-scientists. The two non-scientists were the only ones who voted in favor of a crash program to build a hydrogen bomb. So this is the point at which, if you were a general audience, I should ask, well, does it matter? Yes. The scientists who were in that room, and we have records of their remarks, though it was top security, they just kept a record. And they realized that going from the atom bomb, which is the weapon that about 4 years before, two of them had destroyed two cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, killed a few 100,000 people and so on. These were small weapons compared to what they were there to discuss. The hydrogen bomb, if they could make it, would be 1,000 times more destructive. A weapon, as somebody in that room said, of genocide, for killing people as if by insecticide, as if they weren't human. And they were against it. They said, let's pause. In fact, some of them said, let's go and talk to the Russians about this. It concerns us all. But they didn't. They sent their recommendation next door to Harry Truman, who had inherited the presidency. Harry Truman took a look at it and he decided in favor of the two non-scientists. A crash program was instituted to build a hydrogen bomb. And that's, if I'm talking about historic moments, that was a historic moment. It changed our world. There are now thousands of those weapons in the hands of 9 different states. And there are plans far advanced to increase the variety of those weapons, increase the so-called utility of those weapons. And the opportunity that existed then, and that quite a few of those scientists realized, it wasn't likely that they voted against the proposal that clearly Truman was in favor of. They realized that something huge was at stake, and the opportunity for restraint was missed. Why? Well, many reasons, but one of them was the pervasive secrecy. And so getting things out in the open, which is what we're doing at this meeting, is very important. Well, why did Truman do that? I can make short work of that. That same year, 1949, the Russians, who were supposed to be miles behind, tested their first atom bomb, the old-fashioned type. And that panicked the United States, panicked Truman. He said, we've got to stay ahead. Go for the hydrogen bomb, 1,000 times larger. And he changed the world. We're all complicit in that. I don't want to overpaint my glorious picture of my colleagues as all wise and so on. My colleagues, of course, then pitched in and built the bloody thing. Next item of history, I allowed myself 3 mileposts that seemed appropriate for 30 minutes. First milepost, the photograph of the world, the planet. Second milepost, this missed opportunity. Third milepost is actually one that you might not think of. And it was a few years after this meeting in Washington. I've got the date here, I should know it. Well, it was 1983. So we're getting to more recent times. Many of you remember 1983. What happened in 1983? Well, computers were coming. So what? Well, it meant that we could model the effects of nuclear weapons. And if you read, is it Daniel Ellsberg, who wrote a book recently, Marvelous Man? He describes what I'm just going to describe to you how at sea people were about the actual effects of hydrogen bombs. I mean, of course, they knew the explosion would be 1,000 times larger, but what damage would it do? And the computer answered very clearly, it's going to start fires. Oh, well, we hadn't included fires in our model because we didn't know how to model fires. Well, now we do. And the first thing about fires is that they burn and produce soot. And the soot would produce nuclear winter in a hurry, as the title of this meeting says, and that would produce global famine. So this hydrogen bomb was far more lethal than the people in that small room in Washington thought when they voted against it. They would have voted against it 100 times more strongly. So what are we to do? We need to institute restraint. Do I know anything about that? Well, a bit, because I said I was in these premises and recruited to go to meetings and so on, sort of reluctantly. I went to a meeting in 1960, which is a hell of a long time ago, in Moscow. And Russia was still the USSR, and it was still a rather threatening place. And I was there with a bunch of people who had made the bomb, including the person, Leo Szilard, who patented the nuclear chain reaction, who I knew well, and who, you know, if we had more time, I'd tell you about the meeting and how it got stuck because they said, inspection? You don't trust us? We're Russians. And the whole thing stopped. And Leo Szilard told a story, which, because I'm a law-abiding person and the chairman is looking at me, I won't tell you. But it's a great story. And the meeting went on because of Leo Szilard. But what was the meeting about? You'd hardly believe it. Our best, we couldn't unmake nuclear weapons. And I say we, I was a proper delegate to the meeting, one of the few from Canada. And so since we couldn't unmake nuclear weapons, let's keep the number down, restraint. And the number we suggested to the Russians, and this was partly Leo Szilard being mischievous, but it was also the sort of intellectual exercise physicists engage in and chemists copy them. We said to our Russian friends sitting in the Grand Hotel in Moscow, why don't we put one hydrogen bomb under Moscow and another hydrogen bomb under Washington, and we will stop there. That should do it. And it's a pretty macabre suggestion to make to your colleagues, but we did. And it turns out we were wrong. The moment for restraint, of course, has come and passed. I said that there are thousands of these weapons in many hands now, and but restraint is not totally forgotten. It's there in part one of Donald Trump's open letter. Well, I think I'll just finally go back to that meeting in 1960 in Moscow. If I could turn the clock back, I did get up and talk at that meeting, but I didn't say what I'm now going to say, which is that 2 nuclear weapons are too dangerous. They're too many. Why is that? Well, peace is widely ascribed, with some reason, to the power of deterrence from those terrible instruments. And why is it that there's a constant pressure to get more? It's because deterrence is effective if it's capable of failing. Only then can it be seen as being real, a real threat. And the nuclear powers see to it, by hair triggers and so on, that the threat is indeed real. And that's why we're here today, because it's a path to disaster. Is there an alternative? You're going to hear about it from the next two speakers. It has to do with restraint. It has to do with a meeting that was held in the UN General Assembly last summer, and which people like Doug Roach are bravely carrying forward. It was a meeting to vote on, and a majority voted through a measure to make the possession of nuclear weapons illegal, along with already international law, which makes the possession of chemical weapons, biological weapons, cluster bombs, landmines, all illegal. Nuclear weapons are the greatest horror. They should also be illegal. And there is, however, a catch, and the catch is that none of the nuclear powers have got around to realizing that this would be a better situation. They oppose it. Their allies, one called Canada, oppose this ban on nuclear weapons. And we have to change that. How do we change it? By explaining that there are certain times in history when one has to take history in one's hands and reshape it, as was done in the case of dueling rather recently. My father fought a duel with sabers, can you believe it? And with the burning of witches, that didn't happen in my family. And what else? Slavery, did I mention it? Well, we've reached such a turning point in history, and my 30 minutes are almost up. I think it's worth saying at the end something general about the implications of what I've just said and what you're going to hear elaborated by the next speaker. The implication is that some force has to take the place of military force, and economic force, of course, is the weapon of choice at the moment, and that's understandable. And beyond that is the force of legitimacy, which you see operating in the fact that the President of the United States, than which nobody is more full of himself, nonetheless shares with us some of his correspondence, and he should continue to do that. It's a great idea. What I'm trying to say is that the court of public opinion is going to make the difference between life and death to many of us and our descendants, and you are here to appeal to that court. And 30 minutes are up, and I stop and thank you for your attention.